So good morning, everyone. Welcome to Active Cypher's webinar on the evolution of ransomware. We are joined today by Bryan Hurd. Bryan is the Vice President and Chief of Office up in Seattle for Aon and their solution sets for cybersecurity. And Dan Gleason, who is co-founder and CTO of Active Cypher. And I'm Mike Quinn. I'm pure overhead as the CEO of Active Cypher. Just want to give you a little background on the individuals and what we're going to talk about today. From the individual point of view, Dan has been in this business nearly 30 years, developing software and applications in response to the financial services industry, doing data design as well as process improvement, and has been working with Active Cypher since its founding in 2017 on a variety of products around data protection, as well as encryption and quantum encryption capabilities. Bryan Hurd, again, as I said, joins us from Seattle. Bryan and I worked together for a number of years in the federal government, but most recently, Bryan and I were together at Microsoft, where I ran an organization. Bryan ran the Digital Crimes Unit, which has an awesome reputation within the industry, and Bryan's gone off to basically help clients directly, both in the incident response, but in also the proactive planning, pre-breach and post-breach in the remediation aspect of the business. When we look at the agenda that we have for this hour that we're coming up through, we're going to talk about the rise of ransomware. If you notice, the title was Juvenile Delinquents to Organized Crime. It really has evolved in that fashion. We talk often about the fact that it's ransomware, but we're going to talk about the fact that is it ransomware? Is it more? Is it really blackmail and extortion in these types of times that we're at? And now we have the remote worker environment. We're going to see more exploits that are related to personal data and corporate data being mixed on the same machines, and the vectors that they will use to attack the corporate data through personal information, personal emails and so forth. Then we really want to get into some of the proactive protections that you can gain. There are lots of different companies that are out today providing protection against ransomware in a variety of ways. We're going to go through some of those as they relate to both what Bryan is seeing in the industry today, not really naming any one set of companies, simply to avoid any sort of back and forth between ourselves, but really focus more on what's good, what's not so good, and also really talk about Bryan and our experiences and yours ultimately in incident response in the field, and how long this actually takes to remediate and gain trust, if ever, again, in that environment you were previously operating in. One of the things we want to do is we want to make sure that you post questions to us throughout this webinar. We have a member of our team, Caspian, out there collecting those questions. He will take those and forward them to us, and we may inject them in the middle of an area where we are having a conversation in order to answer that question right away. We also ask you to fill out the webinar poll, which you will be getting a copy of, and you can fill out during this environment or post the webinar. These will help us, but I think they're also questions that should help you as businesses or individuals understand what ransomware is doing and where you see yourself positioned. So with that, what I want to do is start with the conversation around the rise of ransomware. I'm going to start out a little bit and then ask Bryan and Dan to jump in. But, you know, the first time we really labeled this ransomware and started looking at it, it wasn't last year, it wasn't 5 years ago, it was better than 20 years ago, almost 25 years ago, we started to see this start out. And that's why I labeled it juvenile delinquent, because it was young, it was exploring its capabilities. It's now grown wiser, smarter, and as Bryan and I were talking earlier, it's not one individual, it's 999 of them and more who were out there. And they're not working out of their basements. They're working in office buildings. They're paid a salary. There's a whole environment called ransomware as a service, as if it was, you know, basically a business model for organized crime, for, you know, taking your data, ransoming that data, using Bitcoin and other, you know, cryptocurrency environments to A, take your money, B, launder money, and C, you know, maintain a leverage against you no matter where you go, because sometimes you just don't get the data back. Other times they release the key to you, but they've kept access into your environment, can come back multiple times. They can be repeat offenders.
Exactly.
So Bryan, let's hear it from your side, because you're dealing with these folks who are impacted every day.
And thank you, Dan and Mike, for the opportunity to talk to what is, I'm seeing from the participants, quite a large audience. And thank you all from your remote locations for taking the time. All of you are seeing the same articles, so I'm not going to bore you with the day-to-day statistics. I'm going to talk more about what you need to know as an executive day-to-day, and that's what Dan, Mike, and myself want to talk about. So before I get into that, just a quick thing. I've been in the community about 30 years as well. I founded the U.S. Navy's counterintelligence program for cyber at NCIS. For those of you that watch the TV show, it's a great show, but we weren't that thin. We weren't that cute. We can't solve crime in 28 minutes when you take all the commercials out. And for Mike and myself, Mike's been a true American hero for many years. He might not talk about it, but it's an honor to be working with him again. And what we're seeing in these ransomware attacks, the very reason that all of us are at home and diverse drives that very issue that the ransomware attackers are taking advantage of. The number of COVID-related phishing attacks has gone up drastically. The ability to do invoicing scam and get into the emails and trick people into clicking on attachments with a sense of urgency and a sense of fear is at the highest level we've ever seen it. And I'm not saying that because you know, I want to drive some outcome. It's just unfortunately true. We've seen the phishing click rates just spike as people try and figure out whether they're getting a stimulus payment or whether the company still exists. These are a lot of struggles for us, but in terms of what happens when a ransomware attack occurs, it basically, the adversary gets in and in a very short period of time, rummages around, finds your backups, finds your critical data, and in the old days would encrypt them. In the new world, and even in that type of attack, a straight encryption ransomware, the costs for the keys, the ransom, has gone from tens of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars to tens of millions of dollars just for the decryption keys. And to make it even worse, before they encrypt the data, they will exfiltrate it, and even if you have backups to recover, they will extort you using your stolen data, your most sensitive files, your schematics, your diagrams, your intellectual property, the legal case files of your very wealthy and famous customers. They will use that to extort you, even if you could get back to business. So I'll hand it over to Dan to talk about his views on it, and we'll talk more as we go through this time with you about real world things you can do, even if you don't hire anybody. But some of them start with having better security around your crown jewels and a better understanding of using two-factor authentication and other things to avoid getting hit, or if they do get inside your house, avoid them getting to the important things. Over to you, Dan.
That's a good point. Thanks, Brian, and thank you, Mike, and thank you all attendees for taking the time today and joining this. I really hope that there's value that you gain out of this. One of the things that drove us putting together this webinar from Mike and I's standpoint, Brian's, in the field incident response, day in and day out. For us, we kind of backed into this as we're protecting data. We have product out there that protects file system data, and we started to see this increase in aggressive ransomware behaviors that in the past few years has changed from what I would have labeled, script kiddies, where you could actually go out to sites and download little ransomware code bots, compile them, to your own machine, give them your own flavor, and basically launch your own ransomware attack from freely available code on these websites. And there's people have been doing that for, like Mike said, decades. So I've seen this going on for decades. It's been an annoyance, but now this stuff is so weaponized and aggressive and quick. That's so one of the things that blows me away, Brian, is just I don't think people have a realization of just how quickly you get owned when a ransomware payload executes. People think, oh, I have time to respond to this. I'll get my house in order and collect things and protect them. And I was shocked in the past year or two looking at the different ransomware variants, just how they take over a machine from every angle. I mean, you must see a lot of that out there now, being in the field and experiencing this.
Yes, very much so. And for a little bit of context about my role at Aon, besides, and I'll talk on a couple levels, I fly around the world talking not only to CEOs, twice a year, well, when humans flew, so for those of you a little younger, before COVID and we got on planes to talk to each other, I fly over to Germany twice a year to speak at the George C. Marshall Center to a group of about 100 representatives representing 80 different nations, the heads of parliament, heads of the military, heads of police forces. And I'm talking to them about how to fight international organized cybercrime on a global level. Be there no mistake in your mind. The days of kids in hoodies are gone. This is a $1 trillion industry with hundreds of thousands of people in organized groups ranging from 5 to 5,000 conducting these things. It is an entire ecosystem of evil around the world. It is not you versus another hacker mano a mano. It is you versus the Amazon of evil, different than the standard Amazon. They're in Seattle. I get to pick on. So, and I have a lot of friends there. They're good company. Okay. So the other parts of that are, it is a business. The person that gets the access may sell you to a person that then deploys the ransomware and then passes you to the negotiations desk. You are not dealing with one adversary. You're dealing with teams that sleep and eat in shifts. It used to be, everybody's like dwell time. Oh, they're in there for months. They're in there for months. That sometimes occurs. I have worked, and also on the more granular level, I'm the person called in the middle of the night that wakes up and then wakes up what I call cyber smoke jumpers to respond to these ransomware incidents and investigate them and help the person negotiate with the adversaries and help them get the keys and help them decrypt. That whole process is very involved. But sometimes when we do our investigations, we find out that the adversary got access on a Thursday and the entire encryption event with the entire organization, thousands of machines down, was Sunday morning. They are in, they are quick, they are ruthless, and they encrypt you, and then they're more ruthless about the negotiations. And it is, yeah, go for it, Dan, please. I
was going to say, one thing that was resonating with me was just how it's turning from ransom to blackmail, that the feeling is, and Mike, we were talking about this, and I think you're the one that coined it, is that it's turned into something that is so much more personal that, you know, it becomes. Why don't you go ahead and phrase it your way?
So when we look at this, and again, we're not just talking about a business, we're talking you as an individual, that level of violation that you feel, you know, this digital violation that happens to you, it's as if you come home from a wonderful evening with your family at the theater to find your house ransacked. And, you know, you call the police and they come out and take a report, but you know, the next day you're still living in that house that's been ransacked. You know, you've tried to put some things back to where they belong. You know, the insurance company's asking you to identify what's missing. You know, you're going through and going, I don't have any records that basically do this, you know, to tell me what I have, because they stole the digital camera that I had all the pictures of all the artwork and everything else on. And then you settle down that couple of days later, and all of a sudden you get a phone call and somebody says, hey, would you like some of your stuff back? You know, we found this, we found that, you know, do you want to buy it back? And if you put it into the current world today, they want to sell your files back to you. But as you know, once it's out in the wild, it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the original back without copies already being made and stored and sold to the next individual who's going to come in and blackmail you again. And you don't know if it's the same individual or not, because you're going to make the simple statement of like, hey, I already paid you. And they're like, but not enough. We're here again. And so as we look at this from a personal point of view and from a business point of view, what you're lining yourself up to is an increasingly long relationship with organized crime that you don't deserve, your business doesn't deserve, but a lot of people are starting to say, well, I'm going to accept it because I'm going to go out and buy cyber insurance and they'll pay my ransom. But again, that's just money. It's not the integrity of your personal information in your life or of your business. And now we're talking about them commingling in this remote worker environment at a scale that previously hasn't been seen. So Bryan, you've been hitting a few of these events just in the last few weeks, and how are they, you know, how are they being addressed?
It's actually been the last few days and including the last few hours. So one of the things about this role, for each of you who have picked either a security role or CFOs or CEOs, crisis management is a curse. But you have to enjoy your job, even if you're a cyber fireman or a smoke jumper, as I call my team. The shock. A couple of things in that first couple of minutes. You come in and you try and log into your systems, and a screen pops up and says you cannot access this system. You will contact the following to figure out how much the ransom is. Then you turn to try and get your leadership team together, and then realize your email doesn't work. It's encrypted, not only on your PC, the entire server, all of your history, all of everything you've done, all your databases. And for those of you, two things, for those of you that think I'm too small to be hit, the smaller the better, the less security force you have, the quicker they'll nail you. There is no security through obscurity or security because you're too small. They're just wafting across the internet in groups by the hundreds and thousands of adversaries and scanning for just that, small and vulnerable. The other component is it flattens factories. I've seen it go from either the access when they get in and they start pawing around in a day or two. They figure out how to get to corp. They figure out how to literally get to the factory floor and flatten production lines. You can't get product out the door. You can't get an email out the door. And unless, and I'm not kidding on this, please print out your ransomware response playbook, because you won't have the phone number to call me or your lawyer or anybody else. It'll all be in emails where you're used to getting to it. As dumb as that sounds, please print out your ransomware playbook. Then it's a recovery. We drop in as Smokejumpers. We can sometimes do a lift and shift and get you up into Office 365 or any other online mail. I did work for Microsoft. But you'll have email maybe. You'll have your voice in your ears, but not your memory because all your emails are still encrypted. Then we can engage somebody to either figure out if you can recover all that or start to negotiate a multi-million-dollar ransom to get keys that will take you weeks or months to decrypt your entire organization with a failure rate in probably the 10 to 15% that will not decrypt because it was basically corrupted or violated or otherwise not encrypted well, like large databases and things inflate them too well. And that process, we'll talk a little bit more, is it's not only if somebody rifled your house, it's if you realize they've been sleeping in your attic for 3 days before they did it. They've been watching you. They've been eating out of your fridge. And they might still be there. So when you start to recover, you have to get your network back, and then you have to scrub encryption off of every single artifact you own. It is a horrible process.
Is that something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Bryan, is that something that takes a lot of time? Because like, if you look at ransomware attacks, aren't they basically happening down on personal machines? Or do they travel back to the business network? Because I'm trying
they go across. They go across. I usually individual ransomwares. I don't work. I work them at the corporate level. I've deployed over the past year on one case alone a team of 30 individuals just to do the investigation and corporate recovery. The decryption. Basically, I guess each of you on this call, and there are somewhere over 100, I believe, think about opening up, decrypting, putting into a new network every file in your organization, every bit of email, everything you've been squirreling away in the share drives for 15 years of your company. That's what the process looks like. You have to take it off an untrusted network, put it into a clean room, then put it onto the new trusted network. Like scrubbing every book in your house to get mold between the pages.
Wow, that sounds like that takes some time. That's a lot of labor.
And for the well-read audience that probably attends this because of Dan and Mike, that's a lot of books.
Yeah, and we're getting some questions, Bryan, that we'll review. We want to let you folks know we're seeing your questions that are coming in, and they're spot on, and we'll endeavor to answer those towards the end. We have a Q&A, so we're collecting questions. Just a reminder to folks that we're logging those, and we will be getting to those. So be a little patient. However, if we see we're in this discussion coming up on something along those lines, we will bring it up. And there is one question, Bryan, that kind of goes to this proactive.
And you see me reaching up. I'm reading the questions for those of you that are unfortunately getting my hand in your.
Okay. So there was a question there that came in from one attendee about the fact that there's these we do not pay ransomware or negotiate with criminals and hostile parties and simply move to the eradication and restoration phase. I'm going to throw my opinion out, and then I'm going to go to you, Bryan. So first off, these are individual choices that people will make, companies will make, their policies. The one thing you have to look at is, are you educated well enough in just some of the things that Bryan's just recently mentioned to really understand the depth at which that eradication has to take place, due to the fact that the ransomware itself is only a tool in which these cyber criminals are coattailing, it's digital coattailing into your business, and they're basically going to sit back and they're going to have a whole basically toolkit that they can deploy in your environment as you're going through that process that Bryan's talking about, eradication, through the clean room and into a new environment, and that you carry them with you simply from the fact that your diligence on some of those files may in fact not be as well understood. So, going to do with Bryan, but then I want to come back and go into this more proactive mentality versus, awareness and reactive.
So a couple of observations. Having led some of the nation's response to terrorist attacks, I'm a board certified anti-terrorism officer from NCIS, and I actually led the U.S. watch listing's entire response to the attack on the Boston Marathon. So I do support on some ways the desire to not deal with evil and not give them money. However, I will say the FBI has even changed its stance. This is a business decision, and it is an unfortunate one that you will be put in the place of making. Even if you can recover and not have to pay the ransom, that would be great. Because that has occurred, these evil people are exfiltrating your trade secrets, your PII, and other things, and they will extort from you for that. Because what that will cause, and here's a thing to know for you CFOs and CEOs in the audience, the cost of the cyber smoke jumpers, while you think that's the biggest issue, consider it like this. That's the water bill of the hoses of the firemen that put out the fire that burned down your house. That is a rounding error in terms of the cost of this event. The cost will be your legal fees, class action lawsuits, the regulatory oversight and penalties for the loss or compromise of your client or customer's data, the loss of production of whatever widgets you make, not going off the production line and having to rebuild your network. I don't say that in a bad, like, do something, do anything, use two-factor auth, do all the things, whatever you were about to do 3 months from now. I can't tell you how many clients that I go in to do a ransomware on that were just about to implement the two-factor auth that would have stopped the business email compromise that started the ransomware.
Yeah.
And you know what they do in 3 days or less after they've called us and after they're paying all these fees? They roll out two-factor auth in 3 days or less.
Yeah, and
So I just do something, do anything. But if you need to call myself or others before, I'd prefer you call me before to help you wire your house, not afterwards to help put it out and rewire it from the ground up.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Bryan, we want to get into what's the proactive protection, right? Against ransomware and some of the related cybersecurity issues that these individuals and companies would face. So kind of gonna jump into this proactive protection environment with Dan and kind of get into, again, what we at Active Cypher see as necessary and foundational to this level of proactive protection to basically negate the overall impact, the depth of the impact that comes with this, I'm going to call smarter and more weaponized ransomware that is continuing to arrive. So I'm going to kind of push it over to Dan here.
Yeah, that was good lead in to what I was thinking as Bryan was talking is the target is the data, all right? So
Always.
there is a lot of setup that initially goes on, like Bryan was talking about, that these criminals are investigating your network or your computer for a long time before actually performing an activity. Yep. They're looking to make sure no rock is left unturned. It's, if they're in there, they're looking around at your files and your data and things you connect to, meaning your businesses, your corporate, your companies. And they want to see, can we also get into that repository? Can we also access that data? But it comes down to the data, being that treasure trove, that treasure chest. And when I was looking at this and addressing the ransomware issue, I knew by looking at the landscape of how things were changing and becoming more professional coders and less like juvenile delinquent script kiddies, that to set up a defensive network against the attack would be a never-ending, manufacturing of things to look at and control and try to detect behaviors and take control of this. And it would overwhelm the system where the person wouldn't even be able to work anymore. I mean, you'd reach a level of complexity of control that you can't even get the work done. So what we did was we said, well, let's focus on that data. Let's focus on not even making that a target, you know, that let's take that off the landscape. So if they come in and they're scanning, they don't even see your files. They don't even see your data. That was the first approach. And that was like one of the fundamental ahas where, you know, I was like, it's going to be impossible to keep them from invading. The army's going to invade. It's a question of, if they don't see you, they're not going to capture you. And that was like the first approach that we took, is let's make this so that when they invade, they come in and say, there's nothing here. And you still have them, they're still unwanted guests, but they're not picking your pocket.
Yeah, and you started with that, and that you know, when we went down that road for a period of time and developed a capability to address that, we then stepped back and said, you know, what's the next piece of the puzzle? And that is, always goes back to a statement I started making before with physical security. You know, if you have cameras on your house, you have your Ring, you know, hello doorbell, you know, you have the dog with a big water bowl, a big chain, and a huge bone out front. You know, you're not protecting your house. You're telling the bad guy, this is a more difficult target than you want to do. Please get down the street and rob one of my neighbors. That's what you're doing. When I was in the government, the first thing I did was I bought one of these old-fashioned Grinnell alarm boxes, and I took it with me all over the world. And I'd hang it on wherever I was living, the building, the apartment, the house I was living in. I hung it up. And people would look at it and go, that's a big alarm system. And they wouldn't come near my house. They literally would go rob somebody else. And it was empty. There was nothing inside the box. I just drilled a hole in the house and hung it up. And I'd just take it with me again like a bird feeder. But it kept the bad guys away. Today, you can't do that. A password is nothing. They have the ability to basically, they already know all the passwords. They just got to run it against you, and they'll find their way in. So multi-factor authentication, right? Two-factor authentication. Next step in the equation. You know, I'm going to throw it back to Dan, because what we looked at was, what do we do now to mitigate the detonation of ransomware as it goes off in your business?
Well, one of the things that you need to control is the whole principle, like who should be able to access things, who should be able to detonate, you know, because part of this is the ransomware is trying to achieve a level of administrative capability or permissions, just to break it down easily. They're trying to achieve a level of permissions that allow them to leverage the systems that are put in place to provide data for people and provide ease of use. They just want to access that and acquire all of that. But in order to do that, they have to pretend to be someone else or hijack credentials, get in the middle. And there's a lot of technique that they do to sniff and log things, key loggers and stuff like that. But there's a layered approach that can be taken that says, before you're going to access this data, I'm going to challenge you on where you are, what machine you're on, the two-factor authentication, the conditional access policy that say, you know, you can only be accessing these for a temporary period of time for a certain specific usage. There's things that are easily tuned, deployed, set up in today's environments that we work with, that our products are able to look at and work with two-factor authentication, work with the machine control, knowing that this is a permissioned machine on the network, that this isn't a hijacked guest machine or a laptop that's a laptop on the network trying to gain access. And you would know more about all those different attack vectors and things like that, Brian. But from our standpoint, we said we need to have some fundamental pillars of check and verification, validation of who you are, where you are, what machine you are, should you be doing these, and tying these things into AI sensors that exist throughout networking feeds and information logging, so that the behavior can be examined and say, this is exceptional to what this person's commonly doing. This person's never accessing these areas. This person never behaves this way. Or this behavior compared to a history of behaviors is one that is suspicious. These are the things that we had to do, pull into our software to use in the analysis of, should you be able to do these things? Are you a person? Are you a machine mimicking a person? All of the, like I say, these are all layers that end up being applied to perform that.
Yeah, and one of the things, Dan, that we talk about is, and we want to get to, is the fact that we've been building products with an Active Cypher that target data protection, data encryption at the file level. That's been our stock in trade. This is actually part of that. Yeah. This is more on the front end, addressing a symptomatic environment that people continue to report on, versus the ability to come in with, and we just went to a slide, so it's kind of talk to this a little bit, is more around the area of what we're doing with our Ransom Data Guard product, which from a consumer point of view provides a certain level of capabilities, not complex, not arduous to operate, and very easy to use, because it's more of a, you deploy, it runs and operates. You're not involved every day in these activities. They're automated. To the enterprise version of this, which incorporates a much more set of complex rules around capabilities, because you're now working in areas like Active Directory. You're working more in cloud like Azure or AWS. You may have your own private cloud environment. You're sharing information both at a personal level and a business level with trusted partners. We're talking about basically building out that digital secure information or data supply chain end to end. Doesn't matter if you're at an end or in the middle or at the upper end of it. It's how you build that out and how you develop capabilities. So one of the things that Dan and the team started to look at was, how do we take and make a capability around ransomware and all of the stuff we just talked about, and put that into a solution that defeats the threat, whether you're an individual or a business. And one of the things that Dan talked about earlier was the fact that we provide this file cloaking capability, which is our IP, as to how we basically obfuscate the capability such that they don't see your files. And all the way from the consumer side where to the enterprise side, where we actually layer in a variety of encryption, be it AES, which is currently out there in AES 256 version, or what we provide, which is a quantum encryption standard QES capability that's designed to operate against quantum hackers who are using conventional products, conventional computers in a massively parallel methodology with these quantum developer kits to put together capabilities, while much slower than a 1500 qubit quantum computer would be. It's still faster than a standard machine, slogging through trying to crack passwords and get into your data. So I'm going to ask Dan to kind of step up and kind of go through what we're doing with the products here at Active Cypher, but also bounce back to Bryan on the fact that we're now talking about how you get ahead of this environment. But we always go back to the statement is, don't ever go into the situation thinking that you haven't been hacked already, that they haven't penetrated your business. Always approach this as if you've already been compromised, you just haven't been handled yet by them. So I'm going to ask Dan to kind of jump back in on what the technologies have been doing.
Thanks, Mike. So with DataGuard, what we wanted to do was provide the data a safe haven so that if a ransomware attacks, perhaps the system would get locked. Typically when the ransomware activates, it's going to lock up certain processes, antivirus. It's going to look for backup copies that you may have, volume shadow copy, like local backups. It's going to look to see if you have any connected drives, if you have any cloud connected drives. And it's going to be whacking these things, not in a fashion like you would if you were clicking on these things and walking through the steps to turn off things and delete things, but it happens in milliseconds. And so when ransomware attacks and the payload activates, this is something that just takes over the machine in a flash. And if your data has been isolated from that attack and is safe, then you could, recover that machine, but restore that data in a protected fashion back to that machine. Let's say a new machine or a re-imaged machine, that then your data is restored and you're up and running. This is the one-click file reset. One of the things in talking with people like Bryan and that were out in the field fighting these incidents was how the backups were always whacked. There's a local backup capability called volume shadow copy that's keeping a copy of files that if people have it turned on, especially in corporate environments, this is turned on. Then it's a history of your files. So if something were to happen, a file gets deleted, you roll back to a copy of it and restore it. And it's a nice technique, and that's the first thing that they're going to go after, delete all those. And so we care for the data in a way where we're backing it up to the cloud in a secure fashion, encrypted at rest, encrypted in transit. Your data, your files are now protected, not in a file state where they can be discovered, but in a protected data state that ransomware would not see, would not understand what to do with. And so we're able to keep your local data protected and a copy of that data in the cloud in a secure fashion in case a new version of ransomware just locks up the whole machine and you don't have access to it. Like Bryan said, make sure you print out copies of things you need information for, because if it locks your machine, you're never going to have access to it. So you do want to have a recoverable way to get to that data.
I think one of the things also with this is the fact that over a period of time as we've been dealing with this, and Bryan knows this from our time at Microsoft together, we have a lot of customers out there. There are a lot of people who've never fully deployed Active Directory and all of its security functionality, or Azure Active Directory in the cloud, or WIP, or ultimately MIP, which is we connect ourselves to these and deploy all of those additional features that clients have a tendency to dismiss. But secondarily, what we're doing with File Fortress and our Ransom Data Guard product is going into our clients that we're dealing with and saying, hey, look, instead of taking 2 years to determine how you're going to build your security groups, your permissions, your policies around encryption and access, we're going to give you the opportunity to do that encryption today, ensure that it's encrypted locally and in the cloud, in your storage environments, and then you can spend as much time as you want noodling on your policies and permissions and your security groups, and continue to not only refresh them, but tune them to your business opportunities, but still understand that 400 plus file types of data are protected, as Dan stated, in an end-to-end environment, at rest, in transit, regardless of where it is. And if that encrypted data happens to be taken from a server or a workstation, a laptop that someone loses, it's still encrypted. It's never useful to the end user. So it's basically a useless brick. So we want to make sure that we're stressing these opportunities in a holistic fashion to address data protection, but to mitigate the impact of what ransomware is doing today, not because it's top of mind, but because it is moving much faster into everybody's life. And we don't need this to become something that is untenable as a lifestyle for businesses, the individual or the IT professional.
Absolutely, and to talk about a couple things at the level that these things occur. These individuals get access. They then look around your network to find out what your business's most critical capabilities are, where its backups are, and once they feel that they have enough of you, they will flatten your organization with ransomware. So to answer a couple of questions, one of the individuals asked real quickly, yes, RDP attacks are another method of getting in besides just phishing. Those are the two most popular. And somebody mentioned the same question, that they deployed special new capabilities to help workers at home, which left an internet-facing capability that the adversaries took advantage of. Yes, that's a problem. When things are done in an emergency, they're not hardened. If any of you have set up servers to allow work from home environments and haven't immediately brought forward a pen test of that server, again, we do them, so do a bunch of other great companies. I'll give you 3 references. I don't care. Go pen test that server. Go implement two-factor auth. Once they get in, these people are efficient. They're not guessing. They've ransomed thousands of other companies. They'll only encrypt, if they want to be quick and more efficient, they'll only encrypt the top 10 Office file types, just so they hit you where it's worst. And then, of course, they'll throw in your Oracle database, your SQL, some other things. In the zero trust environments, they will try and potentially leverage credentials into your cloud-based storage. They'll take and prone AWS keys. They will get to your system administrators and move laterally. So here's a question. If I get your system administrators access, can I also then go flatten your backups? Why is that not a separate access? What kind of network segmentation do you have? If I get into your house, can I go into every room, including your panic room, including the room where you keep your crown jewels? That might be a discussion topic, even if you never talk to any of the people on this webinar again. So, and in working with Mike and Dan, some of the things about protecting yourselves or responding are those same skills you use to protect your family and protect your home. We just need to apply them here. And I'm a former Navy officer from the Naval Academy and beyond. It's like designing a ship. The Titanic sank because too many of the rooms flooded. So will your business if too many rooms are encrypted. How quickly can water flow that is not intended to be there across them? These are very involved programs. If your first indicator is the adversary's deployment of the ransomware, it is too late. Your ship is foundering. And that is, some of the other questions were along those lines, how they get in, what they do, and please continue to ask your questions. Dan and Mike, this is your show, so continue to drive, but here to help.
Yeah, and one of the things that, Robin, I'm going to point out, you talk about this, this, evil environment, right? I mean, you talked about the word espionage. It's an interesting term. Bryan and I have lived in that world, operated in that world, and we learned over the years when bringing it to corporations, they would always step back and say, well, that's a game of cloak and dagger that goes on between nation states. The thing we want to point out is that as businesses, you deal with nation states every day, both professionally, whether you know it or not. Nation states are doing as much of this ransomware as they can. I'm just going to point out a simple factor, and that is, you notice that automotive, all cars other than a Tesla seem to all kind of look the same. My wife's like, I don't care if it's a Ford or a Chevy. It's the same shaped car. Well, everyone goes out, they use the same wind tunnel. Well, the reality is, how come the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans, all of our aircraft look the same? All of our aircraft carriers look the same. All of our submarines look the same. We are practicing espionage at that level, but they're not going after the U.S. Navy, in Maryland, where their design center is for ships. They're going to the shipyards that are building these and the architects who are putting them up, and they're taking those documents and drawings from them, and then they're building the product quicker. You know, we talk about espionage. I had a company that literally lost itself as a company, went out of business and got acquired because they designed the ultimate mainframe back in the 80s, yet they lost the design on the floor of a hotel in San Jose. Someone stole the briefcase, and guess what? 3 weeks later, that briefcase was right back where it was originally found, in the lobby of that hotel, and that company's competitor came out 9 months earlier with the identical mainframe, took all of their business and put them out of the game. This goes on day in and day out. So don't think that even your personal computer isn't providing information to nation states, because it's building off of every little piece of data, an intelligence tree that has to be managed. And what we're providing and what Bryan's providing are opportunities to basically do the basal pruning on that intelligence tree, cut it down right at the start, and maintain that level of security with your product. So I'm going to kick it back to Dan, because I want to kind of talk about some of the capabilities we at Active Cypher have put into our ransom data guard capability, so you get an idea of what your capabilities would be if using this technology.
Thanks, Mike. You know, I heard Bryan mentioning some of the, you know, enterprise attacks and you know, some of the viciousness, and the way we had addressed the data standpoint, because we're focused on protecting the data, is we aren't trying to build firewalls around the enterprise. We're not trying to secure endpoints. We're focused on protecting the data on the file servers, on the workstations, in the cloud, no matter what, no matter where it is, at rest, in transit, on some criminal's desktop being examined. Because if they do take files that were protected by Active Cypher, there's no way that they can read the contents of these files. So even if they were to get to a repository, a share of files on a file server, with Active Cypher protecting that file server, those files are encrypted and the keys are not available. So the person would basically have a brick in their hands. It wouldn't tell them a story of any intellectual property, even if the file names say that they've hit the mother load of data. That data is encrypted and can only be accessed by the proper person on the proper machine in an authorized area using the proper credentials, whether it's multi-factor, biometric, different types, FIDO keys. We support all of these, but we knew that we can't rely on any one method for identity. We can't rely on any one method for protecting data. They're coming at it so many different ways. There's so many different attack vectors that we realized that above everything, protect the data. So no matter where it ends up, that the wrong eyes can't be looking at this data and can't be leveraging that knowledge of your data against you. In ransom attacks, there's a question in the Q&A here about Las Vegas, and they have some monumental numbers of their attacks. And somebody was asking, you know, they get attacked on a regular basis and they're grabbing files, you know, would Active Cypher protection help in that case? Well, yes, if we're protecting that data, they can restore that data from a backup, knowing that whoever has their files can't turn that against them, can't weaponize their own data against them in blackmail attempts, because that data will be unintelligible, it will be encrypted, and there's no way to access the contents of that data.
Yeah, but to Dan's point, you don't have to change the camera. But, you know, to answer that is the fact that, you know, someone said that, you know, they built it into their budget. You know, this is a question, and this is where we're trying to get the message out. We are working with these people that are mentioned in this and other businesses. You know, we don't want it to become a line item budget like cyber insurance and other capabilities. We want to eliminate that, because you can't build a line item, you know, in your budget for it, because once they find out that, then they're just going to keep driving the money up because they're just going to take away. And where that money is going to come from is a good question, both on a personal level, small business, large enterprise, government, doesn't matter. You know, when we talk about in the slide that's up there, we're talking about the fact that, you know, we and Dan just talked about, you know, understanding what is in your environment. One of the things that we're doing with Active Cypher and our product, particularly in the ransom data guard area, is providing this information in a very crisp and informative methodology that, you know, is easily accessible by the business or the user to understand and drive certain practices within your operation. So when we talk about, you know, cloud backup, whether it's on or whether it's off, you know, that's a simple statement, but it's something that you need to understand. Did it inadvertently get shut off and now only your local protection is active, or are you backing up both? When you look at your cloud backup, it's, you know, what are the files that you're backing up, and what is that percentage, you know, availability of that in your cloud, and the ability right next to it to set up that file protection capability. This is all simplified so that it's not a heavy burden on the individual or the IT professional to do it, and you readily can go and look at this information and understand, you know, what you're looking at. It's not a complex environment. One of the things I want Dan to kind of touch on real quick, and I know we're coming up on the hour. We want folks to stick around if they can. We can go a little bit longer and do some of the Q&A, but really, you know, more along the lines of, hey, now that I've secured all my data, how do I share it? You know, so I want to talk about the, you know, the share, you know, secure file share capabilities that we've developed as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. You know, we're looking at Active Cypher's ransom data guard configuration screen, settings screen here. And this gives you the indication of ease of use, where the file data guard, when installed, doesn't get in the way. This is protecting your data in a non-obtrusive way, so that your files on your personal machine, on your workstation, are no longer able to be seen by ransomware, but you have full access and control of your files. You're opening them, editing, just like you were. It's just that your files are now invisible to ransomware. But you don't want ransomware getting in the way of your file sharing also, where it would be monitoring activity, see a file perhaps get added to an attachment as an email and sent out, and, you know, the ransomware perhaps attached to that file attachment. So rather than working with attachments and email messages, which, you know, that becomes an attack vector there, we have an easy file sharing technique that is, you know, you're right clicking on your file, you say share file. We then take that protected file and create a cloud endpoint for it. We have that file sitting in a secure area in the cloud now, that when you share it, either by email or you send the link, you know, copy a link, paste it into a Gmail, let's say, or just send it by Outlook, it's not being sent as an attachment. It's already been secured in the cloud, and it's available then for the person that you're sending it to, where you're giving them permission to view the contents, print the file, you know, to have permissions to interact with your data. And it's that simple. Right click, share, and now you're offering up to somebody, I am allowing you to see this file and interact with it. And it's simpler than sending an email. You know, that's part of our breaking it down.
And it drives to control, document control, because you're not giving the document to the other individual, you give them access to it. So you can remove that access, and again, understand that data is not in the wild. It is strictly in the environment. Sorry about that. Strictly in the environment that we are again allowing the sharing of the information, but not ownership of it being shared within that.
And that's some of the issues and that the companies face is once the adversaries get in, they paw through all of your most sensitive data. They paw through all the things. You can go ahead to the next slide, please, Caspian. Thanks. So even if you don't call me or somebody like me, this is a good cheat sheet list of things you should be talking about. The quickest version, top left, assessing what you got. That's a good idea. Bottom left, testing what you got. That's a good idea too. Cyber insurance in the middle column. Yeah, if you don't have it, 5 years ago, nobody had it. 2 years from now, nobody won't. Talk to somebody about it, even if it's not me. All the things in that middle column, advisory, get your architecture in line. Mergers and acquisitions. I've worked so many cases this year where somebody bought a company that was already infested with termites, and it ultimately downed the larger parent company when the adversaries launched. The third column, all things to the right of boom, as Mike and I used to say. Incident response, digital forensics, electronic discovery, internal investigations, fraud investigations unrelated to the adversaries outside, insider threat, all of those things. This is a good cheat sheet. If these terms are new to you, you need to evaluate your cybersecurity program. If they're not new to you, then you might need to shine up your cybersecurity program or your litigation response or other things. So, and thank you very much to Robin and the others. I do work with my clients to refer cases to the FBI, US Secret Service, Israeli Cyber Police, Interpol, and others. We do try and bring them to justice, but I'll also tell you, as a company, if your car is stolen, you don't care if it was the Crips or the Bloods. That's not part of your recovery process, and it's not worth a lot of your time and money to think about it. Protect your business. Make it stronger, make it harder. Get back to business quicker, and that is your goal. Please pick good vendors. The final thing I'll say, for all of you who know a teenager who knows something about cyber, great. Would you use that same teenager if they knew something about surgery? And if not, please call somebody that knows what they're doing.
That's good.
No, that's really good. And I want to bring back to the Q&A capabilities here. And you know, we will answer these questions that we haven't addressed. We will ask you to submit more questions that you need answers to that allow us to provide, and as people are asking, the ability to do more of this. We are more than willing to do more webinars, even direct conversations with Bryan or with Active Cypher or between both organizations. You know, I want to thank everybody again for joining us. We didn't want to make this just a product pitch, but as you see, we have a waiting list for the Ransom Data Guard product. We would like you, if you're interested, to join that wait list so that we can put this product in your hands to test, give you the opportunity to basically and put it in an environment that you trust with our assistance, help you understand what is possible for you to do a lot of things in advance of a ransom attack, along with what Bryan provides in advance, during, and after, but also the large ecosystem, as he's pointed out, that gets impacted by this. Two other points within Active Cypher at our main page, you'll go in and you see that, you know, we're providing this data level encryption capability with a product called File Fortress. It has a front end called Scout, which basically goes in and does a health check of your Active Directory environments and really goes out and looks at what you've actually lit up within your business and what you have opportunities to light up within capabilities that are already sitting there dormant. And last but not least, and more of what the future we're facing on this is that we see quantum computing as the next major challenge for data security. And it's not going to be the speed at which it hits your business. It's the speed at which it takes your data and deciphers it, decrypts it, and then sells it or utilizes it. You're not going to see quantum coming at you from the nefarious characters and nation states. You're just going to see the results. And so they're collecting data today that they will decrypt with these systems in the future, because that data is still valuable, even if it's older than what they could get from you today. It's available, and they literally are reselling this information today. So we're here to get in the way of that on your behalf with your partnerships with companies like Aon and Active Cypher.
Thanks, Mike. And thank you very much, Bryan. That
Yeah.
was very informative, and I can tell from the questions, people got a lot of value out of that, and we look forward to doing additional webinars. This is a topic that's always evolving. Just look at today's titles. You'll see in the news new information. But please do, attendees, go to ransomdataguard.com/waitlist and do join our wait list for accessing Ransom Data Guard. We'd love to work with you. And also go to ActiveCypher.com, check out File Fortress and the Active Cypher Scout product, as Mike had mentioned.
Yeah, and one last thing, if you want to, in the questions, give us some ideas of other topics that are around this that you'd be interested in. Two things. One, if we don't do it, we're going to let you know, and we'll hopefully point you at somebody who can provide that information for you. But if we have the capabilities of the partnerships with Bryan and others, we will bring that together and try to address that to the larger community, if that makes sense as well.
And to both of you and to the audience and those of you who are still hung on after the turn of the hour, which is still about, a good 3/4 of the audience I can see. Thank you for your time and interest in this topic. Depending, guys, I can do about another 15 minutes. I can hang on. I was able to push another meeting. But those of you out there that are concerned about this and other topics, take some action now. See if you can get two-factor auth. If you've changed your architecture a lot because of COVID, the adversaries are taking advantage of it. And the final thing I'll say about the question about espionage raised by Robin and some others on the chat. Yes, national espionage and economic espionage for China, France, and other countries is the same thing. If they can build planes cheaper, that's a national advantage. They're looking for information from our mining about where oil or diamonds or resources are in third countries. They're looking for the technology out of our forestry and manufacturing industries. They're looking to steal the design for that next aircraft or the parts and circuit boards 3 vendors down the chain that go into it. You are probably part of a larger ecosystem. As important as you think your business is, so does a foreign adversary or a competitor, or they're just going to ransom you. So I hate to be the harbinger of bad news, but we got to be better. And go get help. Get some help. We're here to help you too, but it's all of us versus them.
You know, Bryan, one thing that came to mind when you were talking about like foreign adversaries and intellectual property, there's quite a few stories that I had heard as we'd gone through conversations with people, that defense contractors who then sub out work, there's like a tree-like structure that down at the widget level, you may have a subcontractor that's producing something that is seemingly insignificant to, whatever the larger F-35 jet is. But
right.
That the bad guys are looking for the people working on the nuts and bolts, because those diagrams can be combined. So the diagram for this bolt's combined with this, and the widget fits together here. Next thing you know, several 100,000 documents, you've constructed a plane or whatever it is. That was an awakening for me, because that's where the people working in that, line of business, those factories, they're not aware. Their mindset is not one in which what I'm doing here is part of a very big secretive project. They're still thinking it as, I've just got this little bolt I'm producing, and the enforcement of the data control and permissions is not in place, is what we're finding out.
Yeah, and recently, a good friend of mine from Cisco, he went to Microsoft, and she's in charge of basically the digital supply chain for Microsoft and Azure, but also talking at industry level about this information. She did this for years at Cisco. Boeing used to have a system called CATIA, which was if you couldn't get into the CATIA system and validate your equipment and parts, it wasn't going to go to a remote maintenance station and be put on one of their planes. They manage that end to end. They're doing that still today. And this is the whole point of the fact that it's a business advantage to be able to say, I can ensure the integrity of the data that I'm providing you and I receive from my suppliers. And if you keep that going all the way to the end product, the winner is, the businesses that can adhere to and deliver that and not be suspect at every turn and every transition of data. So, as Bryan said, we're dealing with some very, very smart people who are spending, billions of dollars to collect information on things none of us would expect to be worthwhile. However, we're seeing and have seen for years in the espionage business, the intel collection business, that all this information collected, once put together, can paint a totally different picture of what the environment is, even to those who are collecting the data. May take them in a totally different direction, but it's lethal. It's lethal, and we have to watch out for that. I don't want this, again, as Bryan said, to scare anybody into anything, but the reality of this is we have a certain set of rules we follow. Bad guys don't follow those rules. And as my daughter stated once before, and that is, technology isn't inherently bad. It's the people who are. And so the freedom of the internet has delivered this to our doorstep, and we need to address it. So, hey, I think with the questions that we have, being courteous to Bryan and his time and yours as the attendees, I think we're going to end this webinar. We'd love to come back and do some more on this, continue this thread, develop new ones. So once again, I ask you to get in touch with us and let us know. And again, I thank you very, very much for engaging with us and giving us your time. I hope that you are all safe and healthy and can enjoy this long weekend that's coming up. And last but not least, a great thank you to Bryan for his time in the middle of all the business that he's doing, the brilliance that Dan brings to the technology, and ultimately, again, to you, the attendees, for taking an interest in this. So again, have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Stay safe.